Hello there, welcome to the coldest opening I've seen in a game in a long while. It's Chaos Galaxy 2, where it begins with some text boxes telling you about various political events in what sounds like ancient China, with the odd mention of some Japanese stuff as well. What's going on? Well, in the background of this text box you can see something that looks like space. Looks like there's a game in here. So this is Chaos Galaxy 2, which is some kind of turn-based tactics game. But it does come with a very contextless opening, where it's like, do you want some information here? And some unknown character is talking to some other unknown character about the actions of other unknown characters. This game desperately needs an opening cutscene or something, some kind of context. I think what might be going on is because this is a sequel, it's very much a direct sequel to a different game where that context might have been provided. So suddenly we're playing the game, all of a sudden it's time to do something. You see me moving the mouse in a sort of strange way. It's because the arrow keys moved the mouse. I was trying to work out how to move the camera without moving the mouse, basically. There was something weird about the controls that I eventually got used to. So, we're looking around a map. It's got some China on it, it's got some Japan on it, I think Greece is on the map as well, but it's also in space, so there's some sort of themed areas of space here in the Chaos Galaxy, and there's some nonsense happening over here with a bunch of mysterious creatures out off on the edge of the map, and yes, we're going to have to be dealing with that. Basically, what this game is, as it turns out, like as I eventually came to realize, it's kind of like a spiritual successor or a homage to the Romance of the Three Kingdoms games on the PS2. So that's a series that's gone on for a very long time, but like the older, middling entries in that series, a strategy game series based around turn-based tactics combined with world map politics in some way. It's a very simple and indie take on that sort of idea, but I kind of knew where they were coming from with this once I realized that. But what we're going to be doing in this video is going to be one of these classic why I didn't play it style commentaries. We're not going to do a commentary on an entire campaign or anything, we're just going to play the tutorial, which is a pretty substantial campaign unto itself. And I'm going to show you, essentially early on, in the very first battle I suppose, why this game is shooting itself in the foot, because by being based on old PS2 era strategy games, it comes with the problems as well. It's a very direct homage to that era of gaming, where a lot of the things that make that era of gaming frustrating and inaccessible are still here. And I mean inaccessible not in that it's hard, in that it's annoying, like in that it's less fun to play than it could be, and it's really obviously less fun to play than it could be. We'll get into that. Here, we're looking at some of the economy stuff. A nice feature of this game is that you can build things instantly. So when you build something, you get its effect in the turn you build it, which is very rare for games where you build things. Usually you'd have to wait some time before it starts doing something. I suppose it's the future now, so despite it having this medieval Chinese aesthetic, we're just building things instantly, and I suppose that makes sense. And I found it enjoyable to be able to think that you can get the effect instantly. So if you want to make some more money next turn, build the money-making thing this turn. It kind of makes sense, and I started thinking, why is it that in most games you have to wait at least one turn before something happens? Like, how long is a turn anyway? Can't we just say it was done before the end of my current turn, so we can have the effect immediately? Well anyway, I enjoyed that random little nuanced feature, not that it matters very much. So you can make all kinds of buildings on your planets. There's a fairly simple, with like a tiny bit of depth, construction system where you have to prevent unrest from going up. So you have to build buildings to make resources and buildings to stop unrest going up, and if they balance each other out, that's fine. We don't really need to talk about that, so let's talk about the battle system happening right here. We've got this tutorial battle against some rebel forces. The battles are turn-based, grid-based, the old classic, with music reminiscent as well of another classic turn-based, grid-based strategy game, Godless Tactics. But unlike in that classic title, the desire to overcome the limitations of the genre and the genre's conventions, well, that's not present here. So we can see me just moving the fleet forwards, and you see how tedious I suppose it is. It doesn't seem that bad really. It's something like 4 actions to take a move, because you select the unit, select where to go, select from a list what to do, and then select what direction to face. So it's 3 to 4 actions depending on what you do during your turn to complete your turn. And the thing is, a lot of the time, you don't need the menu. And this is where the quality of life aspect comes into the game, I suppose. There is a long chain of tedious, trivially easy actions between you thinking of what you want to do and being able to do it. That's the central problem with this genre, like what tended to be the design of games like this in the past at the very least. And this is aping those problems. We'll look at them more in a sec. Here's an interesting feature. When you're attacked by enemies, you get to choose how to react. I think that's a relatively unusual thing to do. So you might choose to try and dodge instead of shooting back. So that's interesting. Getting a bit of actual strategic gameplay during the enemy's turn is quite rare, so I like that idea. As for the actual meat of what's going on here, I feel like I hardly need to describe it. It's the usual thing. Like your attacks have 1 to 3 range, for example, and you decide who to attack with who. Here's an example of how not to play. We're using our quote-unquote infantry against the enemy's infantry. By infantry, it basically means giant robots, because the theme of this game is not only somewhat based on Romance of the Three Kingdoms, it's also based on a Saturday morning selling toys to kids style cartoon show, or at least that's how I perceive them. Things like Gundam or Transformers, things like that, where we've got giant robots, they're fighting in space with swords, it's all good. And it's a case where the basic tactics are going to be attack the enemy in such a way that they probably won't counterattack you. But the problem again is just the clicking. It's all UX UI stuff, the things I love to complain about, and that for some reason this genre of game never really got on board with. So for example, if you're going to make an attack on an enemy and you only have one weapon that can attack them, it still makes you pick it from the list of one weapon, thus slightly extending the amount of time it takes to do something. And then if there's only one target in range, it still makes you click on that target to target it, as if you were going to target the empty space instead. And these little things, they take, 0.1 seconds to deal with? It's just that they're constant and they're slower than your decision-making process. So you think, I'll attack this unit with this unit. This needs to be 1 or 2 in-game actions, because it's 3 or 4. That just builds up over time. And you can tell it's going to be annoying from the very beginning. Like the second I was playing these first tutorial battles, I was like, well, I can see what they're doing with this, but it's too slow. And then I just thought that more and more as it went on. Sometimes games like this, or something like Fire Emblem, will give you the opportunity to turn off various parts of the combat, so it will by default be as slow and tedious as possible. But you can do things like disable animations, or speed up things to make it easier. And this is like the salve that is usually applied by the genre to deal with the fact that people complain about it being like this. And this is an example of a game that doesn't have any of those conveniences. It's about as clicky as it can be to still enable all of the various options it's trying to give you. So maybe you do want to fly up to the enemy and just sit there and not attack them, but because you almost always don't, it's annoying that it makes you make the decision every time. And other random things like it pausing to tell you that you're making a rear attack in the combat animation, when you already know you're making rear attack and you're always going to know that you're doing that because it tells you on the previous part of the menu where you pick that you want to attack that it is a rear attack. Things like that. These tiny problems that have minuscule effects on the game, and you could sense the developers hearing these complaints and thinking, these problems are so small, do they matter? Well, I feel like the developers might not have played a game where it's not like this. They haven't realized how much better it is, how much faster it is, when there's a stronger connection between the speed at which you can play the game physically, the speed at which your inputs matter, and the speed at which you're thinking of what to do. This is a very abstract point I'm trying to make, but the game's too slow. It's really hard to describe a UX problem as usual, and as usual it's always hard to describe the exact kind of problems that I like to focus on in games, which are the tiny problems that have big effects. Tiny in that they could be solved easily, and big effects in that they change more about the game than I think people realise, and this might be a case. Although in this case I'm sure people do realise, because I did see in the reviews everyone else was also complaining that the UX was bad, just in an unspecified way. Here I'm trying to specify it, and failing as usual. So essentially we've already seen everything we need to see about the game in terms of what's going to be a problem. You might have thought, that stuff that flashed by earlier didn't look like much of a problem, looked pretty standard. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of fine, like the game's kind of alright, it just doesn't have slight modern conveniences that I would expect in the future, and I'm putting it to you that this slight problem is enough to write off the entire game. almost as an act of protest. We as players have to protest against having 4 layers deep menu to move a character because it's too annoying, and with more effort on the programming side, this could be avoided by having a lot of automation, prediction of whether a menu is going to be useful for the player. Like, for example, if you move into range to attack an enemy and there's only one enemy, you've got one weapon, it can skip over the pick where to shoot and then pick what weapon to shoot menus, like removing 2 menus from the process of attacking the enemy. This is a game that has an excuse to do that, because technically you might want to select don't shoot or something, which is why the menu's there, even if there's only one option to actually do in terms of taking an action. There are some reasons why playing so slowly offers slightly more strategic choice. I say playing so slowly, offering the inputs so slowly to the player and asking for so many clicks to perform inputs. There is a reason in the game why it's like this. I understand that, but it usually doesn't apply, and this is where we just have to ask developers to be cleverer about this. So if you notice players very rarely pick a certain option and you keep giving them the choice to make that option and they almost never pick it. So for example, players usually, once they move into range of an enemy ship, these are things that can be skipped just with UI and UX changes. Have it so that when a ship moves to a position, all the enemy ships that are in range get buttons over the top saying shoot my weapon at this, and it skips over the weapon selection menu as well if you only have one weapon, or even have more than one button up there, because ships can only have like 2 or maybe 3 weapons max. Just have 3 buttons saying fire my lance cannon at this, skipping over the various stages where you pick the target, pick the weapon, confirm the action, have a thing where it says this is a flank attack and wait for the words flank attack to get off the screen, that sort of thing. That kind of consideration. I'm describing a slightly different version of Chaos Galaxy 2 that in game design terms is exactly the same, but in UX terms is so much better, and the game design is multiplied, its quality is multiplied by the UX, because it doesn't matter how good the game is, you have to interface with the game. That interface can be the weak link in the chain, and that's what I'm arguing for Chaos Galaxy 2. I found it to be a charming and interesting and well-made turn-based tactics game, just with bad UX, just with UI concerns, and with the occasional localization concern, I suppose. Like, I noticed random phrases that the NPCs say, and that their style of speech reminds me of translated Chinese texts, because I'm cultured enough to have read the classics. I'm like, this is like the way that people talk in like the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the book, or the Water Margin or something. Well, anyway, a true localizer would find English equivalents so that it made less sense when they're making weird analogies to things that were references to Chinese culture or something like that. Anyway, it's your boy OffiD making the least video relevant complaints. What's happening in the video right now is something entirely different to what I'm talking about, so I thought I might as well mention. We've seen various things while I was ranting just now going by on the screen. There's a somewhat advanced diplomacy system, plenty of economy as usual, there's a tech tree to go down, there's even multiple tech trees, and every faction has a different tech tree as well, which I was surprised by. I thought that was pretty neat. They all have different unit trees and tech trees, so there's a lot of replayability, in that you could play the game again and have a completely different roster every time. I feel like they could probably get away without even doing that. Who knows? I was very intrigued by all that, but what I want to talk about for the rest of this video is the tutorial campaign and the actual strategies we're going to be using, and a look at some of the gameplay. And I want to get across that I think the gameplay was quite good and quite promising, aside from whatever that was I was talking about for the last 10 minutes or so. And I think in terms of watching the gameplay, you're going to be at an advantage in that the UI concerns will concern you less, which makes it harder for me to make my point. Can we all imagine that I have a point? The usual thing I like to say. Everybody imagine I've made a great and hard-hitting point. Now let's just look at the tutorial, because this is an interesting tutorial to me because of the difficulty. It asks you to do something that ideally in the main campaign you would never have to do. Like, you'd never have to do something so hard as the tutorial challenge in a normal campaign where you're just conquering the other factions. Because we're dealing with this alien invasion thing that's been mentioned before, the tutorial goal is to destroy one particular character among the invading aliens. Normally, you might not have to fight the aliens at all, as far as I can tell. They're like an extra challenge, and the tutorial is do the hardest thing in the game, basically. And I found that interesting, and we'll take a look into this more. Here's one of the screens that made me realise we're playing Romance of the Three Kingdoms, you can gain rank in the Imperial Court. So all of the factions are civil warring factions that used to be under the same government until recently, and this government, the unified galaxy government, still exists to some extent. So all the people, the various faction leaders, have ranks in the government, and they're just sort of secretly fighting each other on the side, like in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms scenario. And perhaps your goal is to get enough number, get enough points to promote yourself up to the top, because you might be noting we're missing an emperor. But it also mentions there is an heir to the emperor, and I think there's a plot. Like, if you played as a faction that has the heir, you could do plot quests to try and get your heir to become the empress in this case, something like that. Who are we in the plot? It doesn't matter, so I won't describe it, but I do remember going through and coming to appreciate it. It's another interesting thing about the tutorial, I suppose, because we saw earlier that contextless information it gave you. If you start the campaign without starting the tutorial, it gives you way more context and information. Like, going straight into the tutorial gives you absolutely minimal data about what's happening in the universe, but the main campaign doesn't give you the tutorial, but it does give you an opening cutscene and information and stuff. We'll see that towards the end of this video, but I thought that was another interesting, and by interesting I mean wrong, decision of them to make with the tutorial system. Now, on the topic of time-wasting mechanics from earlier again, let's waste your time by talking about another little thing which wastes time a little bit. I'm not so sure about this one. We saw there that Wu Feng said something to us. Who's that? I don't know. Basically, all the other characters working for the other factions can sometimes say something to you, and it's, I think, based on them achieving something, so it's kind of information that's useful to you. It's just that it's presented as an interruption that's a problem. So if that dialogue was triggered by that guy taking a planet, for example, then that should have been a notification available after the end turn sequence. We don't want to slow down the processing of the end turn sequence to show me that dialogue, and it certainly shouldn't be what is effectively a full screen menu not taking up a full screen, because you have to click on it to progress. Look, I'm mad about that. Games got that right in the distant past. Take any information that's coming from other factions, any intelligence, and just put it optionally to look at if you need to look at it. Because for me at least, it was usually pointless to receive that information because I wasn't following who those people were in any detail. It would be better if that was all optional. Again, I'm not really showing you what the problem is here in this footage because it's just something that happened over and over again, like in between turns, and I'm going to be cutting all of that out. Trust me, you normally get a lot of random messages about random things happening and you don't necessarily know what it's talking about, but technically it is useful information that you might need to use. I just think it should be presented differently. Speaking of presenting, there's now a white bar at the top because I switched the game to run in windowed mode, and it turns out it doesn't quite run in 16:9 resolution in windowed mode, so that's why that's there, basically. Don't worry about that. What we do need to worry about is the alien invasion. So we need to defeat one of the 5 alien fleets to complete the tutorial, but that one fleet is among the 5, and you can reinforce in all 8 directions, so attacking into this group will cause huge issues for us. I'm looking, of course, to defend rather than attack. But because it does tell you how much quote-unquote power enemy fleets have, you can make a guess about whether it's a good idea to engage them or not. And in this case, you can see I decided not to engage the enemy. I started running away once it became clear we probably weren't going to get a good fight against them. As we run away, you saw me there using a train action. That's something that I think is really useful about this game. If you're doing nothing during your turn, you can train your troops instead of doing absolutely nothing, and your units level up, giving them extra stats. It costs resources to do this, but in theory, if you could get a decent economy, you could just sit there leveling up your units without fighting to become more powerful later. I like that idea because it slightly breaks the usual strategy game meta where being on the offensive all the time is just the optimal play style. There's some value in defending because you can still gain stats and gain an advantage for later by defending, even if there's nothing in particular to defend against. Well, in this case, we certainly do have to defend. We're hacking through a lot of messages as we saw there, so a tiny bit of evidence of the stuff that was annoying me, holding up the end turn sequence. I think it's a bad idea to keep the player out of control, which is what the end turn sequence is, for any longer than necessary. So it should just shoot through and then tell you stuff once you're back in control and give you the option, give you the control over whether you get to see that information. Another thing to mention is that after each turn, there is a 3-step dialogue where it tells you what economy things happen, so how much money you made during the last turn, which of course can be cut down to a 1-step or a 0-step with an optional 1-step in a UX paradise. Very easy to arrange. Anytime there's multiple text boxes that are about the same thing, just have them all on the screen at the same time. Like, just overcome the limitation of having only one area of the screen presenting text and have that overlaying over everything else and taking control away from the player to do so. Now, what's actually happening? Well, we have to defend against the alien invasion, and we've successfully split the enemy up due to their AI essentially just happening not to focus us down, so we end up facing 3 of their armies in a defensive battle at a prepared location, so this isn't so bad. I've mustered all of my units for this fight, so this is everything we have versus a lot of what the aliens have, but we do have a sort of defender's advantage. I've built these ball things that prove to be far less useful than I expected. They are defensive satellites that have the weakest attack out of any of my units as far as I can tell. They're super inaccurate and they don't have much health or anything either, so we just have some extra units in this fight that aren't going to do very much. Here's a useful tactic. You can get your supply ships to increase the accuracy of all your shooting against one enemy target for a turn, which I learned towards the end of this turn, so we've wasted this to some extent. But it's a nice idea. I like that sort of thing, where you have mechanics where the goal is to overcome the RNG, because the combat is basically RNG based. We defeat the leader of the first enemy army in our first turn, so that's nice. And you saw the enemy's morale was reduced, so there is a morale system in this game. I haven't found a way to make effective use of this. You can chip away at the enemy's morale by flank attacking them and rear attacking them, and in theory, if you defeat them through morale rather than through damaging their health, then that could be faster or something. But in practice, I think their health will always deplete to 0 before their morale does, because the things that deplete their morale are also the things that do damage. So there it is, there's some sort of second health bar, there's another way to defeat enemies, but at least for this very conventional army, there wasn't much I could do with that. I couldn't rely on trying to scare the enemy off by shooting near them, although it does mean that if you miss the enemy with your regular attacks, their morale still goes down from being attacked. So you can theoretically overcome some RNG by firing loads of times at an enemy, and even if all of the shots miss, which is always a possibility, you might still defeat them on morale. So it's nice to have that there, it just in practice didn't do anything for me. You might notice we're playing this tactically very badly in this stage. The reason is, well, at first I didn't realise how to control half of my army. Because our army is split between 2 commanders, the turn order is like the turn order of the commanders, so these other units that are on my side are out of my control for now, and here later, once the turn order goes around and it's that commander's turn, the commander of the infantry, we can start moving the infantry units over. So obviously the best tactical thing to do in this battle would have been to spend my first couple of turns moving the main fleet back into the infantry and then all fight together after that. But because my fleet spawned like in close contact with the enemy, I just started fighting them from the beginning, meaning we'll waste a couple of turns without our full army being available as we move around like this, which is another opportunity to just mention how annoying it is to move around. It's one of these things where you know exactly what you want to do, and you may not even care about the details, but having to go through the details, I don't know, perhaps it's just my ADHD adult brain to some extent. I wanted my turn to be over already when the turn is just moving, because I know what I'm going to do. I'm waiting for the next thing to happen now. It's just that you have to make however many it was, like 16 different actions to move my army, and it was just another case where the decisions don't matter very much, so it was inconvenient to have to make the decisions, but again, the ability to make the decisions is technically necessary, so it's in a bit of a sticky situation there design-wise. Anyway, I'm not really going to talk about the fighting in the battle, because all we're really doing is just attacking each other over and over again. We can use the fact that our main fleet has weapons of 3 to 4 range a lot of the time, which will outrange the aliens, so we can make attacks where we don't get counter-attacked. That meant that in a pure just brawl, a tit for tat, we're going to be getting 2 attacks for every 1 enemy attack overall. So, blasting at each other's good for us. And the blasting is just RNG based blasting. One thing I did note as well is that being really close to the enemy doesn't increase the accuracy of attacks, as far as I can tell anyway. So there we shot 5 times into the back of those aliens, only 2 hits. Generally, the RNG is quite low in this game. Well, it's above 50%, so you could call that high, but that's low for me. Like for me, low RNG is 90% because I always want actions to be guaranteed. I've ranted about this a million times in a million RNG based games. But generally, you're going to hit about 2/3 of the time throughout the game, but it's the classic case where the disappointment of missing is not balanced out by the joy of hitting. You'd rather just hit all the time and have the strategy come from something else, or at least that's what I would rather it be like. So we win that battle by just grinding down on each other, and there's a really interesting mechanic here. If you defeat an alien army, you unlock a new tech tree, a tech tree that's as big as the original tech tree as well, with loads of new units on it, where you can start integrating alien technology into your stuff to get better stuff, which I really liked. We might see that a bit later, and it's something where it's sort of like a payoff for having to face the endgame crisis in the beginning, because in the normal campaign you might not have to do this, as I hinted earlier. You can set it up so that you don't have to fight aliens, or just be strategically somewhere else on the map when the aliens invade. But there is actually a payoff to doing this that can give you a long-term advantage. Now, speaking of the long term, we're facing now an issue that didn't really come up in the previous battle, but now it's going to come up, because as you fight, your units spend energy to do all of their actions. Energy is only restored by turns passing on the world map. So if you have to face multiple battles during one turn, which is what's happening here, we face the battle with limited energy. All of our health and energy depletion from the previous fight carries over into this next fight, which is the third of the 3 alien armies that were queued up to attack us. So they haven't fought yet, meaning they have full energy. All we can do if we don't have energy is nothing. You can press rest as an option, which is the do nothing option, and this restores your energy by like 10 to 15 points. But if I recall correctly, it costs like 100 points to fire your weapons, so obviously that's going to be a completely useless way to get energy back. You'll be long dead before you've charged up enough energy to do something in battle. If you try to charge up the energy in the battle itself, you have to have turns pass on the world map to actually get energy back in substantial volumes. There's one other way to get energy back, and that's what I'm going to have to rely on in this stage. Your supply ships can move some of their energy to other units during their turn. And that's, well, all we can do right now, other than try to use the little bits of energy we have left on units that maybe didn't fight quite so much in the previous stages. So there's the supply action going off. We'll supply the best of our infantry units here so that they can shoot for this battle, and over time we could gradually heal up all of our units' energy supply, so long as the energy supply in the supply ship lasts. It is a finite amount you have to distribute like this. So that's something to keep in mind that we're learning the hard way here. If you're setting up for what could be multiple battles per turn, it might have been better to have the first battle be as drawn out as possible. So for example, the aliens have a few supply ships on their side. So what I could have done in that first battle was take out all of the enemy's combat ships and then just done nothing over and over again while the enemy supply ships were doing nothing over and over again, because every turn we're gaining energy, and then come out of the first battle with full energy ready for this battle. Now that's a really annoying thing to have to do, and if you've watched me for a long time you might know my automatic comment to something like that coming up. If there's a gameplay if there's some technique which is really effective but is really boring to pull off, the game has to be changed to make it not as effective or to make it not boring to pull off. So in this case, you might expect there to be some way for your energy to be restored after a battle, simply because in battle you can restore your energy. So you could sit there pressing end turn a million times to restore your energy. It should skip over that part and just be like, let's just pretend you did that and automatically give you some energy back after the fight. Perhaps based on how many enemy supply ships were on the map, it's like you captured them or something like that. Who knows? Well, it's a mechanic where you can see what they're doing with it. It's very clear in that you're supposed to be conserving your strength. It's just that by providing a couple of really ineffective ways to get it back, it teases you to some extent and makes me think, oh, why are they bothering to do this? Something has to go, even if the thing that goes is the ability to get your energy back. If they go even more harsh, I might be less critical of the mechanic for some reason. Well, anyway, there's some more supply coming in. We'll just keep doing that until we can attack the enemy, and in the meantime just get shot, I suppose. we do have something that will help us when it comes to getting shot. And it's this thing that's flashing in the top left right now. This bar is like your special move bar. Once it gets full, you can do a special thing based on what commander is active right now. This commander's special thing is that all units will stay alive if they die for 2 turns. But check this out. It pops around and says Unyielding Soul on each unit that is affected by this new move. There's another example of a UX thing where you could skip that, show them all at the same time, anything like that. I'm of the very editorial attitude when it comes to little things like that, where you have to justify doing something where you've taken the player's control away. And in this case, the justification is probably, we want to show you what units that thing affected. But there has to be a better way. In fact, there is, to show them all at once. But you know what's always a better way? Give the player the option to see it or not, because they probably already know what units it affects, and it says on the unit when you select them that it's been affected afterwards. You could even just have them glow or something. You know, there's 1,000 ways of communicating that little piece of information, and the way I don't want to see it is one by one on each unit. Or at the very least, I'd like to see that disableable. We're back at it again with that commentary. This game doesn't really have any controls, like it only has very limited inputs you can give, so there are no hotkeys, no like inputs to do that will skip over things you don't need to see, and it's exactly the kind of game that needs them because of the genre conventions I was talking about earlier. So I'd say the game doesn't need any game design based changes, it only needs boring UX changes. Boring as they are, they really would make the game design more worthwhile. It enhances everything. Looks like the enemy also popped off their special ability this turn, which makes them basically invincible for a turn. So that's a shame, we'll have to wait around and just get shot by them even more. Many of the alien units have this hard carapace ability that makes it hard to attack them. It acts like a second health bar of sorts, where you have to deplete one bar before you can really start depleting their health bar. A case where perhaps the morale system would come into play more. You might be able to rout a unit before you kill it if it has tons of armor. Something like that. You can see the idea there, but at least in my tutorial experience, nothing like that came up. And while I call it a tutorial experience, this is what the main game is like as well. Basically, we're just playing the start of a campaign. That's all the tutorial is. Only it's a surprisingly hard start to the campaign, in my opinion. Well, we go on and shoot the enemy some more. We're finally grinding down the boss here with our entire army, and we take out giant armor. A giant armored guy. Well, I suppose we got what it sounded like we were getting with that one. At the end of a battle, if you have 2 armies in battle, it only shows you the results for one of them. That's another little thing where it's like, why not show me the second one as well? Have it on a second menu, or include it all in the same menu? That would be good, wouldn't it? I don't know, like if it thinks I want to see one, why would it think I wouldn't want to see the other one? They're both equally important. Well, anyway, we move on. We have stopped the alien invasion of our territory. We took down those 3 armies. We picked up a whole bunch of alien knowledge, as it briefly said there. And this is what the alien knowledge does. Now we have a unique advantage in this galaxy because only we can buy things from the alien study tech tree, including various new units, the ability to self-heal, which sounds good. I'm going to end up taking the bottom left option here, which is just Alien Slayer. More damage to aliens. That's exactly what we need right now, in fact, because we need to go and kill the rest for the tutorial goal. If this had been a normal campaign, I think I could have just sat here and done nothing. So to some extent, I'm being screwed over by the fact that I'm in the tutorial playing as this faction rather than playing as them normally, because we've had a pretty decent start to the campaign, but it effectively doesn't matter because all we were supposed to do is take out one of the alien fleets, and that one is at the bottom of the screen right now. Check out how much random stuff's going by. Again, that was a decent example of an end-turn sequence filled with random information that you can't really use. You've got a thread on the side as notifications once your turn comes about. Minimize the amount of time the player's out of control. Once again, the same thing I keep saying. I'm harkening back to something like the classic Rome Total War days, where tons of information would be given to you every turn, but you didn't have to read it, and it was your choice to open it and look at it, so it feels like less of an interruption, less like it's stopping the processing of the game to tell you something, because you chose to look at it. If you know what I mean. Well, we need to do something very specific in the tutorial campaign now. We need to absolutely run for it towards the objective and hope we get there. The objective is moving away from us as we go, so that's going to make things extra difficult. The only advantage we have is that the aliens are stopping at each planet to kill everybody, and it takes them a couple of turns to kill everyone on each planet. After that, the planet is like a dead world, which I think later in the tech tree you can bring back to life and use it for your own purposes. So again, in this campaign, if we defeat the aliens, we could then sneakily move into all of the dead planets later and be the biggest faction. We're actually already the biggest faction on the map. But we could take that further using the alien invasion to our advantage once again. So I like this idea that there would actually be some advantage to dealing with all of this rubbish early on. However, we're not going to get to see this because it's the tutorial campaign, basically. I was checking out the diplomacy options. You have quite a lot of diplomacy you can do in the game. We don't need to do any in this case. I was just seeing, are the factions next door to us going to attack us? They're fighting each other right now, so I figured they weren't, and we don't need to build any units at home. Not that building units at home would matter, because it's only the units we have out in the field that we're going to be able to use for anything useful. And along the way, as we're trying to go for this alien, we get this other cutscene where some other weird aliens have appeared, saying that because the aliens have captured a certain amount of life, it's going to spawn the real alien invasion. Turns out that was just the Vanguard. And I do sort of enjoy the way the aliens are all just random things. There's no thematic link between what the aliens are. Some of them are just guys. There was like an Egyptian bird god. There's like a worm. I think they've just taken a collection of like Power Rangers villains and thrown that in. So it was going along with that Saturday morning cartoon show vibe, I suppose. There's loads of stuff out there on the edge of the galaxy, and that stuff wants to kill us all. And there it is, you can see another massive stack of hostile fleets has appeared, once again right next to our territory, and this time, because the nearby world, or nearest other world that isn't our territory is dead, they will all just go straight for us, so we're absolutely screwed here. There's also a cutscene where the Transformers are talking about something, another random interruption is going on here, the exact sort of thing we don't want to see. It doesn't matter. So you can see we're in huge trouble. If I hadn't been doing the tutorial quest and hadn't gone out to be chasing that alien off to the other side of the map, we would have our units at home, we'd probably have more units as well, and we might be able to do the same thing we were doing earlier, defending a choke point just against the alien fleets one after the other, and try to win, take all of the alien knowledge, and go on to win the campaign using that, because we'd end up with a big advantage. We're not going to be doing that. We're lucky enough, though, that I am able to reach the target alien in the final turn of the tutorial. So we're just barely getting away with this. I'm able to trigger Li Chung-sung's special ability, which is to reduce the strength of a nearby enemy fleet. You can do that every few turns on the campaign map, I believe. So we use that to make the aliens a bit weaker, and then we'll pile in with the one fleet that can make it this turn to trigger the battle, and the main fleet is close enough to come in as reinforcements on the second turn. So that will be that. We have way more number than the enemy in this battle, so all we need to do is just shoot at them for a bit and we'll be fine. But I was just glad that I actually made it, because there was no guarantee that this battle would be possible. It was only possible because the target alien fleet sat on the same planet for a while, killing everybody, allowing us a chance to catch up. Here we get quote-unquote ambushed by this squid that just appears in front of us. There is a submarine system. You might have noted that some units in the game are classified as submarines. You can quote-unquote dive in order to disappear from the enemy's view and then surface again to shoot them. So some sort of subspace diving with the submarines going on. A handy thing that I never really use, but I think the ambush style attacks you get mean you can't be counterattacked or something, so it's useful for that. Well, anyway, my main fleet appears on the enemy's flank a couple of turns into the battle, so now it's time to start shooting. Here's some particularly annoying shooting. Our first ship damages the squid, but its weapons fail as a result. Then this submarine misses the squid, and its weapons also fail. It seems every time you shoot, there's a chance your weapon will break and you won't be able to fire it again until either one of your supply ships has repaired you, or I think after a certain amount of time you get the weapon back. That's a shame. Not quite sure if that's a good idea to have in there, because it's a really unfun mechanic to have. It's not really something you can prepare for or deal with. Just like, oh, I guess I can't attack anymore. For some reason, that's a shame. Feels like maybe it shouldn't happen first time, or there should be some thing you can do to prepare against it, like having the ship be well maintained. Who knows? It's just a thing, another RNG thing to deal with, a tactical challenge, but one that feels like it's implemented in the sort of lazy and boring kind of way, where it's just like, here's a problem. You want to have there be some sort of mechanical handle on the problem that you might be able to use to stop it from happening, or see it coming, or do something with it once it happens that's more interesting than just getting rid of it immediately. I don't know what I'm talking about as usual, but it doesn't matter, because we've saved the galaxy, quote unquote. We have managed to engage the aliens. We shoot them down. We win. Happy ending. However, of course, while we've completed the tutorial goal here, we leave our empire in a state where it's certainly going to be absolutely obliterated by a much bigger force, starting in the next turn essentially. And perhaps to make things just that little bit worse, It turns out that when you kill this alien target, that's also a trigger for an alien invasion to take place, because that was the signal. It sent out a signal with its life energy or something. I think it even plays the exact same cutscene as before. So I don't know if the alien fleet that's attacking us now will spawn again. There'll be 2 of them. Will just nothing happen because it already triggered? Will the fleet that's attacking us be sent back to its start position, thus buying us some extra time? We don't find out, because that was also the last turn of the tutorial. We just get kicked out, which is sort of a shame. I would have liked it to say, do you want to continue the campaign from here? Because it might as well say that. It was basically just a normal campaign that we were playing. Well, we're kicked back to here, so here's the actual campaign menu. I could pick the same guy and just start again, now that I know what I'm doing, but I didn't especially want to. Interestingly, you can play as the alien invasion right from the beginning, which is a very interesting thing to do. Reminds me of something like Stellaris, where they released that DLC, where I really thought they were going to let you play as the Crisis factions, and then when you couldn't, I got annoyed by it. Well, here you can play as the Crisis faction from the beginning, and well, loads of other random factions as well. You can be the Greeks if you want, they're out here. There's these weird guys, the Omnic Apocalypse, I think they're an AI or something. There's a guy with a top hat and a monocle. All kinds of high-quality ancient Chinese factions that surely are based on real events. Who knows? But as I said, they all have unique tech trees and unit trees, and various diplomatic quirks as well, which is quite interesting. They probably could have gotten away with it being more boring than that, so I suppose it's good that they didn't. Well, that could be said of any game, I suppose. Here is an interesting feature as well. You can actually just make your own faction and make your own guy and pick all of their character traits and bonuses and stuff and their special abilities, which I found quite enjoyable. So you can completely just add a new faction to the game, and you can pick one of the neutral planets to use, and you can add all of the officer characters as well if you want to go through the character creator a bunch of times. You can make a completely custom faction, and I really liked this idea. I felt kind of compelled in the end to play as a custom faction. And there's another interesting part about this as well, which is that you pick your tech tree and what units your faction is going to have. But to unlock more options for a custom faction, you have to play the game as the normal factions. So this is a rare case where a sandboxy strategy game actually bothers to have unlocks and content you can get by playing the game. Usually that won't be done for no reason. That's just something that's bad about most sandboxy strategy games. There's no particular in-game reason to play as a certain faction. Here, if you play as some factions, you'll unlock certain tech trees and things, potentially giving you some build you could use for a future campaign. So there's a tiny bit of meta progression available in playing the campaigns multiple times, which I think is nice. I always wish strategy games would do that, although one example I remember, to mention Rome Total War again, is one that wasn't very good. If I recall correctly, when you first play the game, you could only play as Rome, and you had to complete the game as Rome or defeat factions in the campaign to unlock them, and then you could play as other factions. Which is all well and good, I suppose, but it's really annoying because there were so many factions in the game, and you had to actually do a decent amount of work to ever unlock them. And there was some workaround where you could type something into a text box somewhere or a text file in the game's folders, and that would disable this unlock system for you. And they got rid of it for future games, but I like the idea that something interesting can be unlocked, and something like unlocking new special units to add for your custom faction. That's a perfectly cool thing to add, where you're not taking something away from the main game. And it's something I very rarely see, and here I am seeing it just in this unknown indie turn-based tactics game. I like that, so I want to point that out. Here we discover that when you start the campaign, you have the choice to just not have the aliens show up, and you can even choose where they come from. So they're very generous about your implementation of this beginning game crisis. We can leave it on the default settings, I suppose, because in this campaign I'm setting up, I'm on the far left-hand side of the map, so having the far right-hand side of the map be invaded by aliens wouldn't be that bad for me, I don't know. It means the chance for me to get that alien tech isn't going to be there, but it also means other people will be distracted by something. Will the aliens snowball up and get to the point when I can't kill them if I let them invade in a place where I can't go and stop them personally? Will the AI be able to deal with them? I suppose that's another consideration. But it's interesting that it allows you, as the very first campaign option there, to just turn off the alien invasion, so clearly there's two kinds of campaign here being made available. And here it is. Here's what they should have put in the tutorial, an explanation a little bit of what's going on. I'm not sure if this is an explanation of what happened in the other Chaos Galaxy game, or if this is just supposed to be a contextless thing. Aliens invading, maybe they were stopped at some point, the Chinese empire in space fell apart in the process of fighting off the alien invasion, and then there was another one. And this context gives us a much less cold open on the game. And the message to take away is, well, I'm seeing this now at the end of my Chaos 2 Galaxy experience, because the developers need to keep in mind that the first thing the players do is probably going to be the tutorial rather than just starting the campaign. So having any information needed to understand the game, or understand even the tutorial, be at the start of the campaign isn't a useful place to put it. In fact, if you just took it out of the campaign and put it just in the tutorial, so you actually cut it from the campaign, that would be better. It would be better to have it in both, but if you're going to have it in one, then you've done it the wrong way around, because you've put it on the place where new players probably won't see it before they actually start playing the game. And that, the start of the game, is going to be the end of this commentary, for the reasons I've vaguely laid out in this video. Here was another interesting thing, by the way. You can complete the game as a vassal of somebody else. This is another thing that's quite rare for strategy games to offer. If you're part of a larger faction, you're a vassal to somebody and you have a suzerain faction, if that overall coalition that you're in does well, you win as well. So you can win as a servant to another faction. Normally a game would always insist that you be the master faction, but you can win as a loyal vassal, which is quite nice, an alternate option. So here we are, the new weird guy purple alliance in the corner is ready to conquer the world. Looks like we'll be conquering Greece because we're over here in Greek space, and somewhere on the other side of the map, the faction we were just playing as is probably going to get ravaged by the aliens, and there are the aliens in fact. But yes, this is where my campaign comes to an end, because while I was kind of interested to play from here, I'd gone through the experience of having to click too many times. There was too much UX jank for me to want to continue, and it's one of these issues where the beginning is where it's at its least bad, because there's the least to do. You can imagine later, as you have more and more fleets, more and more units, and the battles last longer and longer, just the amount of time it will take to do something will go up and up and up and up, and the amount of random stuff hitting you every end turn will go up and up. And I just foresaw that while I liked a lot of the game's systems and mechanics, and I liked using them, the exact way in which I was using them, the interface between me and the mechanics, was a problem rather than the mechanics themselves. A relatively rare case where I step away from a game purely because of UX, and I actually did think that I wanted to play it, and I just thought it's going to be too annoying. To some extent it's just because it's a tiny game as well. I thought, well, I suppose because I'm playing games for the purposes of making YouTube videos, that's some incentive to play bigger games than this. But I also like to just play things that I personally enjoy, so I was tempted to do it for that reason as well. But that's the end of this video, that's the end of Chaos Galaxy 2. We've basically seen what we need to see. I could play from here. It would be a standard 4x thing where we just need to get more number than other players and go after them. I'm missing the opportunity to use this huge crab, which is our faction leader's main unit, and it's a shame not to send that huge crab into battle. In space as well. Why does the crab have legs? I'm not entirely sure, but I'm very willing to watch that crab blow things out of space. A shame that it's not going to happen. Thanks for watching this random commentary on Chaos Galaxy 2. Perhaps you've got some insight into why I hate clicking the mouse on my computer in certain ways, and how perhaps more importantly, some small changes and more options being given to the player to get the gameplay thrust into their mouths faster would make this more accessible, and if I remember correctly from reading the reviews of the game, other people seem to think that as well, so it might not even be just me this time. We need a UX revolution in this game, and really in every game, because getting UX people onto a development team is extremely expensive and annoying to do. But even someone as annoying as me shouting at the internet can give some insight, or just watching a player play a game and notice where they seem to be having trouble doing something trivially easy can give you that sort of insight as well as a designer. I think, anyway. I suppose that's it. Chaos Galaxy 2 seemed like it was a good game, but I refused to play it. The classic Off-ED review.